that says this, and you can't really. He's just imagining the scenario and trying to argue. Yeah, like people argue about grass, like like
Double check that.
I like to feed these to Andy as they come up. And,
if I could get everyone's attention, call the meeting to order. You want to go ahead and take your seats, please? Thank you, everyone. Sorry, we're starting just a few minutes behind. We have one person joining us online, so we're just making sure that we are set up for that council member. Are we good?
I think so. Dr. Criddle, can you hear us?
Yes.
Wow. I'm going to go ahead and start with the roll call. Shanice Brown. No. Here. Benny Gates. Here. Philip Hart.
Here.
Yana James. Johannes.
Yep.
Jennifer Mullen.
Here.
Kendra Norrell.
Here.
Casey Overton. Michelle Parrish. Maritza Peachin. Councilwoman Robertson. Charlie Wilson.
Here.
Roger York.
Here.
Okay, excellent. There's Maritza. Perfect timing. Just voluntold you for all of the assignments.
Excellent. Can't wait.
Just kidding. So thank you everyone for joining us today. For those in the audience, just a reminder, the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the Planning Commission. The council is charged with advising the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultant team in the zoning ordinance revision process. And the public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look over the August meeting notes? Okay, do we have any comments, questions? Can we get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second. Okay, with the motion and the second, all those in approval state by saying aye. Any opposed? All right. So at this time, we'll open the public comment period. Any member of the public is welcome to speak on any item not on the agenda today. So we'll start with those that are in the room first. Is there anyone that would like to offer comment? Group. Is there anyone online that would like to offer comment?
No.
Any hands raised? So with that, I'll close the public comment period and move us to the next section of the agenda, which is questions and discussions from the August Advisory Council presentation. Marianne distributed this presentation by email, so hopefully you've all had a chance to dig into it a little deeper. I know it was a lot of information to take in our last meeting. So we're going to open the floor to questions from the council on the presentation, and Renee Bieberstein is going to be on hand to answer any questions. So with that, I'll start the question comment period.
They're saving up for the next conversation.
Do we need to give everybody a piece of cake that's outside? Get you a little sugar rush to get you going.
Well, I think there were some comments that were submitted by the end of that week. Were those incorporated?
Everything that we got in terms of corrections, there were some factual corrections that we had to make in the presentation. So the final version that's posted should reflect that. Just wanted to see if there was any more substantial questions people had about the material that was presented or thoughts you have about it.
Thing that wasn't submitted through email that hasn't already been captured, or any questions? I don't want to rush this, but if we don't have a lot of questions and comments, I want to keep the agenda moving because I know that we have another presentation from Renee on the draft pattern book and the draft zoning framework. And then we're going to break into some facilitated discussions. So last call from the group on any questions from the August presentation. Mr. Creedle? Looking behind me like that's where he is.
I'm fine, thank you.
All right. Renee, it's all you.
Okay, thank you. Give me a second to share my screen.
And Carlos is online now. I made him a.
Yes,
You feel that?
can I just close that window there? Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, so I'm just going to present. We'll do a short presentation, and Carlos will do a presentation to his material as well. So he's joining us remotely, so hopefully we'll be able to hear him speak when we go to his slides. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'd like to get to the activity, but this will help introduce it. And this kind of builds on what we presented to you last time. So just very briefly, where are we in this whole process? Just a quick reminder again, we're still in this middle period between May and November of this year. We're working on both the pattern book and the zoning code and districts framework. The hope is that we're going to get to a kind of rough palette or set of districts conceptually by the end of November, and then we'll be able to move on to working out more details and mapping after that. So we're still we're getting closer to the end of that period, but still working on it. There's also the sort of side piece, which I mentioned before, that staff are thinking about ways to do a kind of a short-term update to the existing code to reduce some kind of procedural SUPs related to nonconformities. So these will be not substantial SUPs, but ones that are more related to existing conditions and just trying to allow the sort of existing traditional historic fabric to be maintained rather than having to deal with SUPs basically to kind of reproduce the same things that are existing in historic neighborhoods. And that's part of what the pattern book is informing. So when you hear from Carlos, he'll be speaking to some of that. Just quickly, the August engagement. So there was 2 open houses that happened in August. Lots of you came to them, but for those who didn't, this is just a really quick summary. We'll be doing a more lengthy summary later on, but just to kind of give you a few highlights of some of the things that came out of that. I would say overall, there was they weren't highly the attendance wasn't super high, but there was like pretty good deep discussion that we had. So I was pretty happy with them overall. We got to talk to people for quite a while, and we've met with some of those people again subsequently. So I would say just overall strong support for the zoning refresh, lots of good in-depth engagement with people. We had some really good conversations. There's an overall, we asked people to sort of pick their priority between speed of development, affordability, and quality, and people didn't really want to pick. They basically said they wanted, those factors shouldn't be compromised, that we should basically find a way to balance those out. There was really strong general support for allowing multifamily uses along major streets in residential areas, which is an issue we'll be getting back to today in more detail. So questions to be answered about exactly which major streets and what scale of multifamily, but broadly speaking, there was strong support for that. General support for allowing a broad range of uses, mixed uses within the neighborhood mixed use area. And again, we'll be getting that I'll let you weigh in on that in more detail today again. But just generally speaking, people were interested in allowing some businesses into those areas as of right. Additionally, there was sort of a broad range of views in terms of heights for destination mixed use areas. So we gave people a map and asked them to kind of broadly sort of say what sort of range of heights they'd like to see in different destination mixed use areas, corridor mixed use areas, and community mixed use areas. For destination mixed use, there was examples that were kind of across the board in terms of what people said. Most of the people said over 10 stories generally, but some people said less, 5 to 10. And again, we'll be getting back to that in future meetings and trying to hash that out in more detail. So just that won't be the last time we talk about that for sure. In terms of corridor mixed use areas, there was also mixed use. Most people were sort of landing in the kind of the 5 to 10 story range. So that's sort of towards the upper end of what the plan says. not too many lower than 5. Broad support for 5 to 6 story heights in community mixed use areas, which again is sort of towards the upper end of that. So obviously there's a lot more nuance, and we'll get into the mapping in more detail later on, but that's just some of the big highlights. And just a reminder again that we're still collecting feedback on those exercises from August. So lots of you guys provided your feedback. If you haven't already and you want to formally provide feedback, there's a link here that takes you to those boards, which are still available online. You can comment on them. And so we're going to move now to the draft pattern book update. So this is Carlos. So Carlos, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, so just tell me when you want me to switch slides.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is a very a quick update of some of the stuff we presented last month. As you might remember, last month we were the work so far when we jumped to the neighborhood scale is looking into percentage of nonconformities. Since that presentation, we've been tweaking some of the of our analysis and how we are actually doing the math after some of the feedback that we got from you and from the city. So just to set the tone, Jackson Ward, we're still talking about in the number, I think, got reduced from 68, 69 to 62 after we took a deeper look. Still, we're talking about over 60% of nonconformities mostly do form. But then, and if we can go to the next slide, we tried to understand more what does this means in terms of what are the form nonconformities, and also how does this fit in a distribution. So most of nonconformities are coming from lot sizes. So this is the various the lot sizes that are non-conforming. But if we go to the next slide, we graphed the distribution of such lots, right? And this also was brought out by one of the a comment, I remember which of the members, what would happen if we overlaid the R8 zoning district into these traditional neighborhoods to see where does it fit. So what we see here is everything on blue is all the parcels distribution that are larger than the minimum required for both a 2-family and single-family detached. But then we have most of the parcels are actually fitting between the R6 single-family detached and the R6 single-family attached. And then you'll see in between the dashed line, that's where the minimum for an R8 district would be. What this is telling us is for these traditional neighborhoods, the R6 district, and is the range is very wide and very variable. So it really depends on the form, and there's a possibility of understanding. Okay, maybe the R6 attached single family, or even lower, the 25 percentile is at 1,900 square feet minimum. This was helping us to inform really what is the minimum that will make most parcels conforming. And if we go to the next one, we did the same analysis for lot width. It's in different ranges. And then when we see the distribution in the next slide, same story. We have the R6 single family detached and 2-family is everything after that is conforming no matter what. But then there's a large amount of parcels that are in this range between attached and detached, and that really is what is making a lot of these parcels non-conforming. Could you go? Yes, and then we go to Oak Grove. We went to Oak Grove, which is an R5 majority predominantly zoned. Same story. It's a 68% non-conforming, which this one is interesting. Why an R5, which is it's not the same kind of pattern. So when can we go to the next one? It's the same story. It was mostly due lot size, and then when we see the distribution, and here we're talking about a single minimum. So go to the next slide. Everything in blue is okay. and that line is where the R5 minimum is. So we have a large amount of parcels that are still below, and the 25% percentile, which means 75% of the parcels would be conforming, is at 4,735, way below the 6,000 minimum. So this is helping us to understand not just physically where is the layout and what patterns are non-conforming, but also like what is the actual numbers. And this is will inform what Renee was sharing earlier about this side task of finding updates for the current zoning in the short term. So if we go to the next one, we did the same thing for lot widths. And then if we go to the distribution, very clean. The 50 feet, you can see how there's a spike there of parcels in that range, but then there's clearly two other lot size typologies in the case of Oak Grove, which really doesn't comply and is far from the R5. So this is helping us to get a number effective in a way. And I think that is the last slide. Oh no, this is so we map this citywide. So this is every single parcel in the city that is shown as R6, how they distribute in terms of lot sizes, and how they fit within the graph. And as similar to Jackson Ward is we have this most of the parcels, and actually the peak of this graph is contained within this issue if you are detached or detached single family, and this is helping us inform again the numbers. And then if we go to the R5 citywide, lot size, lot widths as well, there's a very clear percentage, a clear spike in the graph where parcels are 50 feet or bigger. So those are probably out of neighborhoods that were developed after the zoning or following the zoning from the 70s. But then you have all this other range of parcels that are still zoned R6, but their metrics don't really match. Interestingly, though, the R6 attached single family will actually receive all of these and contain most of even below the 25 percentile. Then if we go to R5, this is a more normal distribution. It's a single triangle. The R5, sorry, is behind the peak and close to the 25 percentile. What this is telling us is majority of parcels are conforming for the citywide R5, which makes the Oak Grove case more interesting. Here in this case, Oak Grove is really misaligned with the majority of R5. So, and here's like where our neighborhood approach, our neighborhood analysis is really going to matter, and it will be part of a discussion later on of which neighborhood and what is the condition on the ground for some of the neighborhoods, and what are the numbers that apply to those. So if we go also to the lot width distribution, same thing. It's a very clear, most parcels are there's a clear spike in this 50 feet, but then there is a volume of parcels that fall below, and the 25 percentile is still below that number. So that's pretty much a summary of how we took to heart the question, like, okay, well, what is the numbers? Like, what will make these parcels conforming? So we went back and looked at this distribution, and that's the last slide. Renee, if anybody has any question, I'm happy to answer. I think you're muted. If anybody's speaking, I can't hear anybody.
You hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everybody understands what that was about. So there's a whole pattern book analysis going on. Carlos has just been sort of focusing on this one particular aspect, which is trying to help the city make these sort of quicker fixes to zoning to remove all the kind of, or to reduce the number of special use permits that are being done strictly for procedural reasons, basically, not for substantial reasons. Specifically, it's about historic fabric, basically having zoning imposed on it that's more suburban in nature than the existing fabric. So a lot of old neighborhoods in the city have small lots and narrow lots. The zoning basically that was put on them later on after they were built requires that any new development there have larger lots and wider lots. the city would like to, so basically every time you build something there, you have to get a special use permit just to basically replicate what was there before. And so to kind of not have to go through that, we'd like to sort of reduce the size of the minimum, probably reduce the size of the minimum lots and the minimum widths to accommodate this sort of development. The question, I guess, is how far are we going to reduce it? And so these analyses that Carlos has been doing basically give some idea. The 25th percentile was just the number we picked to sort of say, if you were to try and, you know, make 75% of the area conform, this is where you land. And then there's the various sort of metrics related to the zoning right now. So one possibility is that for R6, we could just go back to the R6 attached single family minimum size and just say that it applies to every kind of property in R6, whether it's attached or detached. That would just be a number we pick that will resolve most of it, but not all of it. Still, the red stuff on the left side here would not be resolved. We could say there's no minimum lot size and just see what happens, or we could pick a number that's less. So this is sort of a conversation that we're still having with staff about, you know, what's the most appropriate way to deal with this. The other thing is, you know, if you were to set a minimum lot size that was reflective of a particular historic neighborhood, be it Jackson Ward or whatever, that same zone gets applied to other parts of the city where there's maybe a different traditional lot sizes that are bigger. So you might have somebody in one of those neighborhoods say, hey, it's great, I can divide my lot in half or whatever and produce more than one with this lower minimum lot size and width. And, you know, do we want that or not? Is that a negative outcome? Because it would produce something that would be out of keeping with their surrounding neighborhoods. Obviously, all this can be resolved later on when we remap zoning. So we can apply whatever minimum lot widths and sizes we want to when we remap it. But we're talking about kind of a quick fix where the city is going to take an existing zone and just tweak the number in it basically to allow a different lot size and width. So hopefully that was helpful. Yeah.
What is the difference between the yellow and the red, or yellow and the orange?
Right. So the blue ones, I'll say first of all, are ones that exceed the minimum lot size. So those are conforming technically today. The ones that are in orange exceed some of the minimum lot sizes, but not others. So R6 has a minimum lot size for attached, and it has a separate minimum lot size for detached and two family. And so regardless of what they are, some of them meet that requirement, and some of them meet all the requirements. They're blue. Some of them meet only this one minimum, and some of them don't meet any minimums.
So it could be.
And to add some context,
Sorry,
for
Carlos, go
example,
ahead.
yeah, for Jackson Ward is a very good case study because they're narrow parcels in 16 feet that used to be single family. Now they're 2 units, so they're two family, and now they're required to be 50 feet, right? So because of the use. But the historical fabric is parcels of 16 feet. So that's where the misalignment is happening. You have, and everybody I'm sure knows well, these examples of two families, sometimes even three families are also used non-conforming in Jackson Ward or the Fan, where they're narrow parcels, historical parcels, but because they're two family, now they somehow need to be 50 feet.
So I understand. So you've taken an existing house, you've divided it in half and made it into two families. Now technically your lot needs to get much wider to be conforming. But you can still fit two families obviously physically into a much smaller space. So sorry, Richka, you had a question?
Oh, I was just saying it doesn't matter here with these numbers, the bars represents the number of parcels. And so you don't necessarily know, some of these could be two family that are blue and some of them could be single family. You have no idea.
So
Yeah,
for Jackson Ward, it's hard to know. Sometimes we're depending on the assessor's database, which ones are two family. And also there's a difference between detached and attached. And in traditional neighborhoods like Jackson Ward is a bit of murky territory. And that really makes it or breaks it. So we will need to go like parcel by parcel to know, oh, this one is single family attached. So then one can be 16 feet in this graph. Or actually this one is detached, so it has to be 50 feet. And then in Jackson Ward, you have a lot of these single families or two families that they're detached because they have this very narrow separation between firewalls, or sometimes the separation isn't even visible at all, but they're really detached, and they need to be 50 feet. So it's almost a case by case basis, and this is why it's represented in this yellow orange to understand this like gradient that you need to go case by case to understand if you're conforming or not.
More questions or comments? Sorry, go ahead.
I think maybe, I don't know how in the weeds we're expected to get within this conversation, but what's frequently a consternation between building code and zoning code lately has been abutting versus attaching things. If there's a way of kind of threading the needle there and maybe doing a text amendment that might free up the zoning administrator a little bit to interpret abutting shall also mean attaching, and here's why per XXX reason. That might be something to think about as we work on a text amendment or something like that. For the quick fix, we could discuss more later with the bigger rewrite.
Does anyone have any additional questions?
We can happy to come back to this more later on if anybody wants to talk to me about this. Again, it's getting kind of technical. I'm going to give a really short presentation right now, not more than 15 minutes, just to introduce the exercise that we're going to do, our exercises, and then give you guys as much time as possible to get going on them. So just briefly about the format of what we're going to do here. I'm going to give a little presentation. Hopefully I can do it faster than what it says here. It's going to be focusing on specifically on the residential and neighborhood mixed use categories in the plan, which is where most of our conversation has been so far. We'll get to the other mixed use categories in later meetings, maybe the next meeting, but just really want to kind of dwell on some of these bigger issues with these two ones first. We want to identify some big questions here that we need your help resolving. So these are things that we didn't feel like there was enough guidance from yet in the plan, and we need to kind of make some calls on how we're going to approach this. And we're going to share some precedents from other projects. We're also going to present some very, very kind of preliminary conceptual new zoning ideas in terms of zoning districts. These are, again, just sort of to put out there for discussion, not necessarily recommended yet. Then we're going to have a breakout group discussion. Basically going to have, you're in 4 groups right now, so it's whatever table that you're at. We're going to try and have a 30-minute discussion on the residential land use using the questions that we've given you, which I'll present in a sec as well. And then 30 minutes on neighborhood mixed use and on a sort of slightly separate topic related to affordable housing incentivizing. And then hopefully we'll have 15 minutes for a report back at the end of that. There should be enough. We're going to give worksheets for everybody to write down responses to the questions in. I'm hoping that one person in each group can kind of be the official note taker and take down the notes from the group discussion. We're going to have somebody from the consultant team of the city go to each table as well, so we can help you answer any questions or prompt discussion. And then at the end, like I said, somebody can hopefully stand up from each group and give a kind of a summary of what the big points were that come out of the discussion. Feel free to take down whatever notes you want in your own workbook, though. And if you want to share that with us later on, we'd be happy to see that as well. So very briefly, the presentation here. So the residential land use here, you've seen these maps in the previous presentation. This is where residential is in the city in yellow. There's a set of policies around it in the plan. They're augmented by nodes in some case. They give it sort of special heights and other considerations. But generally, there's an idea about use and intensity and other factors for each one of these. Some of the questions that we want to ask about residential that we want you to be thinking about during this presentation and afterwards. So right now, Richmond has got 5 single-family detached zoning districts, and they're basically defined by different lot sizes and lot widths. So do we think that some or all these districts could be consolidated, or do we need all 5 of them going forward? So big controversial question. We want to sort of hear back from you about how strongly you feel about these lot sizes and widths. Second one, ADUs are currently allowed in all single-family zoning districts, single-family detached, or all single-family zoning districts, but they're limited to either 500 square feet in size or 1/3 the floor area of the main dwelling, whichever is bigger. That's the current rule. Is there a case for increasing minimum ADU size? Or should zoning go even further and allow 2 units of the same size, basically a duplex in single family districts? So do we essentially kind of eat away at them and say they're no longer single family by allowing 2? We're kind of on sort of a spectrum right now in the sense that we're already allowing ADUs there. So just want to feel out your interest in going further. If you don't want to, or if you oppose it, that's fine too, but just want to hear back about how you feel about that. Third one here, Richmond 300 calls for small apartments of up to 10 units along major streets within the residential area. Obviously more in other parts of the city, but we're talking about residential right now. Should small apartments be allowed along all major streets? And you'll see those where those are mapped out. They're going to be in the worksheet workbook that we give you. I'll show them here in a second. Or should small apartments be limited to less than 10 units along certain streets? So we'd like you to actually mark up that map instead of say, okay, we think on these streets, it should be 10, these other ones, maybe it's less, et cetera.
Renee.
Yep.
I know you said you're going to hand out a map about major streets, but
Yeah.
for those of us that don't have all the verbiage memorized, or maybe this is a good question for Maritza, sorry to put you on the spot, if you want to maybe define that for us. Or is it going to be very clear on the map?
It's going to be clearly marked out on the map, but if you want to explain how you got about to landing on those major streets, I don't know.
I just know that there's some language in the Richmond 300. I don't want to make it difficult, but I know that there's different levels of familiarity with these documents here.
Yeah,
So-
Your tables.
Okay.
Should be a map.
I think we're going to hand it out. Sorry.
Okay.
So here's the current zoning for within the residential area. Again, you've seen this in the previous presentation. Is the single family zones, the 2 family zones, it's sort of the main metrics associated with them. These are the ones we're just going to be talking about right now. So thinking about the lot size minimums and lot widths minimums. So there's other things that are different, including the setbacks and whatever, but those are kind of ultimately driven by lot size and lot width. And so when we think about, possibly consolidating some of those, we're looking at kind of what the key breaks are going to be within these. So why regulate minimum lot size? Colin, you want to maybe speak to?
Well, I think we want everybody to think a little bit about minimum lot size. Does it make sense to continue to regulate minimum lot size? Why do we regulate minimum lot size? I think minimum lot size probably existed back when we were talking about new subdivisions and new development, and we were trying to make sure we had enough capacity and availability for infrastructure. I think with land as a major driver of the housing cost of housing, minimum lot sizes are likely a key land use barrier to housing affordability and density, climate change. So cities are looking to enhance affordability while addressing climate change. So they're just looking at evaluating, like, does it make sense to regulate minimum lot size or not? Just some of the benefits of building compactly. I think just wanted you to think about that a little bit in terms of like reducing sprawl and encouraging development in a more compact development pattern. What is the impact on infrastructure? Different types of people living together, variety of incomes. What's the impact on schools and getting people to schools? Support for alternative forms of transportation. What's the impact on traffic congestion? Providing more support for walking and biking. What's the impact on the natural environment, climate change, greenhouse gases, and then kind of, the big conversation is housing. Impact on housing choice and affordability, and just trying to get different types of houses in different places and different price points for different types of houses.
This is well, sorry.
So your neighbors down the road there in Durham, they're looking at updating their regulations. They've just adopted a new plan. They are and have been also struggling with the cost of housing for a long time. So they've just been thinking about mechanisms and ways to get kind of more affordable housing products on the market. This isn't necessarily part of the project that we have done, but just because of the issues that they were having with the cost of housing, they looked at ways to kind of reduce the cost of housing in general. One of them was lot size. It's called expanded housing choices, so you can look that up online. They were kind of tracking that. So some of the things that they've done, expanding where duplexes are allowed, reducing the lot size for single family dwellings, increasing the opportunities for accessory dwelling units, and then reducing minimum lot widths, and just overall kind of modifications to their infill standards just to make housing cheaper. This just kind of gives you a sense of the program and how many units have been built using that program. And in a sense, it's not a lot. So we were kind of looking at the small house, small lot option. And so you can do, for example, you can do a 5,000 square foot lot, right? There was this idea if you reduce that minimum lot size down to 2,000 square feet, you could get smaller lot sizes and, in theory, cheaper units. There's limitations, so they restricted the size of the unit to 1,200 square feet. So when you choose to do this option,
Top or bottom?
Whole thing.
the whole thing,
The whole thing.
1,200 square feet,
Nothing.
800 square foot footprint, and then 2 stories. So the idea was to try and generate smaller units, therefore cheaper units. So this is back in 2021, but the median house sales price in their urban tier, $600,000 for a single family house. The small lot options, the median sale price was coming in at $350,000. So this was allowing for houses to show up in neighborhoods that were basically unattainable because of the cost and price points. So in neighborhoods where it was $600,000 for a house, you were able to buy a $400,000 or $350,000 house in that same neighborhood. Smaller house.
And they with a blanket overlay type of a ordinance that like was superseding underlying zoning.
Yeah, so pretty much for most of their single family districts, you could do this option.
And what was the general impact of small houses amongst a bunch of big houses? Just,
People care.
Yes.
they
Yeah.
didn't care for?
No, the neighbors weren't happy.
Weren't happy.
To be honest,
And did it affect their values at all?
I can't comment on that necessarily, but it was opening up neighborhoods that weren't accessible to a lot of people. So we've done some work on it now, and the number is more like 400,000. What they're pricing these units at, but they're showing up in neighborhoods that cost 800. Their houses cost $800,000, and I would suggest most of these houses that are showing up, they're not scraping or tearing down houses. They're taking scraps of land that were kind of left over in these neighborhoods and building on those. And it's, if you go back the slide, 215. I think this was like 3 years worth of data. So 215 small lot options were built in 3 years. So not like a crazy amount of houses showing up.
And the answer to which might be useful in discussing this, and there are a number of people here who might be able to answer it. And that is that most of the stuff we're getting in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals, in fact, most of the special use permits are for 1 and 2 family. And yet the developers are coming in with big houses. They're like 3 and 4 bedroom exclusively. That's all we ever get. And the excuse that they make is there's no market for small ones. Is that really the case here in Richmond? And there are people here who can answer that. Why aren't these being built?
Yeah, I think this is another thing that we can, so we have an economic consultant on our team as well too, who can help run scenarios for us. So I think these are some questions we can put to him once we've got some specific numbers. We could try out.
But there are a lot of small houses being built.
They're not the ones that we're seeing.
Up in Churchill,
Maybe you're not seeing those ones.
They're not that small.
there are a lot of, definitely under 2,000 feet, to under 1,800 square feet. There are houses being built. I understand that's not a, and then I don't know of any 1,200 or anything like that, but there's a fair number of small
But all
footprints.
I'm saying is that the people that are coming before us are saying the reason that because we've been getting them in areas where there are a lot of bungalows, and it's like, well, you want to put this monster and mix it in with all these bungalows. Why can't you do a bungalow? There's no way it'll work.
In the high rent district, yeah.
No, they're talking about modest neighborhoods.
What?
We're talking about places like parts of Highland Park and, northern
really?
part of Churchill.
So,
I think
if you
that's
guys, sorry. I interrupt you.
I don't,
We
didn't
can
want
have
to
this
disagree
discussion
at all.
after. Yeah.
It's just that one of the things we're going to be talking about is housing size.
Yeah.
And if there's a problem, it would be interesting to a little bit know more about if there is a problem, why there is a problem and how it affects.
I guess it's market risk.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's probably more like in a neighborhood like Highland Park, people want a bigger house with fancier amenities to like drive them to that neighborhood that's more on the edge. And then, but places like those tiny house that was built on, not tiny, the narrow house that was built on Grove, that's like much smaller, like works because people want, it's like a very expensive neighborhood. But some of that might be part of what's happening.
That's interesting.
I think it also probably has a lot to do with who's building and what they're prioritizing. I'm sure they're making, their margin is a lot higher on a larger house. And I think there is demand for smaller single family homes. But I think the incentives and the priorities of a lot of the builders are to make as much money as they can. So
Yeah.
they're building bigger houses because there are bigger fits to be made there.
So then the question is whether or not either incentives or rather disincentives incorporated into the regulations might push them in a direction where they might.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of our clients would be interested in a fast track process that allows you to build many more smaller houses than the one bigger margin, bigger house. But you can still maybe make even more money doing a bunch of smaller houses. Every opportunity is different, but if you're going through a special approval process, that's like maybe a special use permit 9 months down the drain, holding costs, et cetera. At that point, it's like, well, I kind of need to do what makes the absolute most sense. And maybe in that case, it is just the one house, right? But if there's a quicker, better, more targeted way of getting smaller houses to market quicker, they wouldn't have those holding costs that might change the equation for them.
So you feel comfortable if the opportunities were made more attractive, that it might happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not my client.
Not yet.
Yeah.
I don't have any.
I could see. Yeah, I mean,
I would say someone that represents the builders, I think, yes, for some, depending on what client and market they're serving, but we also have to think particularly in, I hate to always say post-COVID because COVID's still alive and well, but we have a lot of people that are now working from home or have chosen to homeschool. And so the family dynamic is a little bit different and people may want a home that's got 2 offices plus, they have 2 or 3 kids. So there is a demand within the market too for those homes. And I think it was Maritza, you said living, floor plan, was that you? It's a floor plan. Somebody said. If you don't have a lot of backyard, you may want a lot of entertaining space inside. So I think it's also the market that's attracted to those homes as well as there.
Yeah, so sorry, I just want to keep away from the presentation and we can have more discussion afterwards.
You have 20 slides left
Yeah,
and we're supposed to be
I know,
already in the group
I know.
discussion.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I hate to, I don't want to cut off conversation, but I don't want to cut the group conversation short either.
yeah, I'm hoping we can still have 30 minutes or close to 30 minutes for each of these topics. So we're still with this. So residential, I think I basically kind of went over this in the questions at the beginning, but we're basically all these questions are kind of feeling out your how far you think we can go in terms of gently intensifying residential areas before you think it's too much. So we talked about smaller lots. You've already got the allowance for small ADUs. Could we allow bigger ADUs that feel more like houses? Or would you feel okay about going all the way up to the duplexes? Since we're kind of on the spectrum already. Next one here, I think we've already kind of covered this as well. Benefits of multiple units on a lot. They get smaller, they get cheaper as units get smaller. I think that's kind of obvious. So hopefully looking for more opportunities to bring more people into the market and to find more affordable starter type homes or homes for people in different positions in their lives. The approach to major streets. So this is the map that we were talking about before, and you'll get a printed out version of this as well. But basically this is the major streets from the plan superimposed onto the residential area. So the plan is directing us to consider the possibility of small multifamily along the edges of major streets in the residential. So residential mostly single family, despite what we talked about before. Maybe there's, single family plus an ADU, et cetera, but mostly single family. However, there's the possibility of allowing small multifamily along these edges. It says up to 10 units. Do we want to just say every single property that's fronting one of these streets in a residential area can have the potential to go up to 10 units? Unless there's something in the plan, it's saying something else, which was the case around a few nodes and whatnot. But do we apply that kind of blanket across the board, or do we sort of say certain streets are 10 units, certain streets are less than 10 units, certain streets are whatever? So we're going to be asking you guys to kind of weigh in on this and mark up that map with your own thoughts, given that you know the city a lot better than we do. And the other question here is, within these small multifamily areas, do we allow modest mixed uses like corner stores in those buildings as well too? So that's another question to think about. Finally here, so just to wrap up the residential section, I'm going to just sort of present these kind of for discussion topic here. Here's 3 new zones for the residential. So let's say we replace all these residential zones that are there right now with these 3 zones. What does that mean? So RN1, which we're calling it, and RN2 and RN3. RN1 is basically replacing the current R1 and R2. So these are the least dense residential lots. We go with a minimum square footage of 15,000 square feet for lot area and minimum width of 90 feet. So that's basically consolidating those 2 together and using the more permissive minimum. For RN2, replacing R3, R4, and R5, going with a 5,000 square foot minimum and a 50 foot minimum width. And the possibility of a bonus along the lines of the Durham example that Colin just raised. If you're in RN2, you can go down as low as 2,000 square feet and 20 feet wide, but your units are going to be limited to a 100 square foot footprint and 1,200 square feet altogether for those houses. So they have to be small. And then around the edges, so these are again, these major streets here, applying a sort of a more intensive small multifamily zone, RN3, that would allow up to 10 units. And again, question for you guys, if you think there needs to be more nuance in there than that, but these are, small traditional apartment buildings. All the metrics here are just the kind of the bare minimum. So I won't go through all these. We can talk about them as a group. We're basically trying to keep it as simple as possible to begin with, and then ask you guys and others to try and say, okay, we know we need more to make this work in more detail, just starting as simply as possible. So for example, saying pretty minimum 25 to 15 to 10 foot front setbacks, 10 feet setbacks on RN3, 0 side yard setbacks. However, for RN3, there would be limits based on the fire code. So it wouldn't be really 0, but it would be something like 3 feet maybe, or a little bit more than that, 5 feet.
Depends on the fire rate.
And 5 foot minimum side yards for the R1 and R2 and so forth. So I'm not going to go through all these, but happy to talk about them more later and happy to get your thoughts on them. I just want to move quickly to neighborhood mixed use, which is the other half of the discussion. So this is the neighborhood mixed use area. We've talked about this before. This is where it's mapped in the plan and the requirements for it. Questions to think about. Richmond has a whole lot of multifamily zoning districts, all with different density restrictions. Should some or all those districts be consolidated? So sort of the same question we asked for residential. The current multifamily zoning districts regulate density using a minimum lot size per unit metric. So it's a roundabout way to regulate density. Should the new zoning move away from regulating density and focus more on built outcomes? And then finally, Richmond 300 calls for predominantly residential neighborhoods with a small percentage of parcels providing commercial uses. This is neighborhood mixed use. Should commercial uses be allowed everywhere in neighborhood mixed use, or should they only be allowed in certain places or limited in size and scale? So are we talking about convenience stores on corners, or are we just saying you can do a convenience store or a restaurant or whatever you like or shop anywhere? Question for you guys. So current zoning in these areas, single family and 2 family. So there's a mixture of this stuff. There's also multifamily. And again, the point we raised before about minimum densities, we're talking about these here, the number of square feet per lot, square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. And then there's only a tiny bit of existing mixed use within the neighborhood mixed use area. So what are we talking about in terms of zoning? So the RN3 zone, which we already showed you guys before, again, these are just conceptual for discussion. That was being applied around the outside of the residential areas. In the neighborhood mixed use, we would apply that in the interior of them. So we would say, you know, these areas of the city, you would have the possibility of building a small apartment building of up to 10 units with these metrics associated with it, if you're in a neighborhood mixed use area. Whether or not commercial uses should be allowed in those areas, again, is a question we're asking you. If you're around the edges of those areas, along major streets, maybe you can go up further to a larger apartment building. And so here, these are basically replacing existing multifamily zones, like these ones here, but doing away with that minimum density metric and just regulating height instead. So asking you about how you feel about that. And then again, same question about these as well too, in terms of uses. Should we allow commercial uses in these areas or not? Should be limited in some way. And so just a few kind of illustrations here. This is basically taking the R6 area. Here's sort of the most intensive thing you can do right now in terms of density. And if we allowed you to build multifamilies, small multifamilies up to 10 units, here's what you might be able to get on that same space. If you went, again, you're going from about 20 units per acre to about 50 units per acre. So it's a fairly substantial increase. Thinking again about the kind of interior parts of neighborhood mixed use areas. And these are sort of the results of these demonstrations. These aren't requirements. So when we talk about 50% lot coverage, that's just what you're seeing in this demonstration here.
It meets the district.
It meets the district. So this is basically something that would meet R6, but would max it out as intensely as possible, versus something that would meet RN3 and max it out.
Do you guys have one that looks more like?
We could change the image if that's what you're.
No, it's just. There's R6, which is a single family.
No.
Zone.
It'll
But you don't have like our neighborhood example that has that kind of pattern.
No, we could draw that easily, but we didn't do it for this presentation. So yeah, there are some areas obviously in neighborhood mixed use that are R2, R3, R4, R5. And so you would go from that, you know, potentially up to what we're showing as RN3 here.
I guess what I'm reacting to is I see the R6 example of existing, and to me that a lot of that looks like the fan today.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of like having all of the fan become RN3 is like,
yeah.
I don't, sounds a little unappealing.
Yeah,
And
so with that, are you saying like RN3, you're not saying that RN3 is like explicitly only someone one.
It's up to that. So we will allow everything below that. So right. So it's saying you can build up to a 10-unit building, but you can also build a single family attached building, you can build a 2-family building, you can build a single family detached. So this is sort of the maximum you can build under it. And we know that in the FAM today there's already small apartment buildings that are non-conforming.
Yeah, I think it's a good question.
But it is a good question. So if this is too much, then
I think we're just trying to help people understand what the plan might give you. If the plan is suggesting in neighborhood mixed use areas, you can get up to 10-unit apartment buildings. This is what it might look like.
Let's say on like primary, like some corners for neighborhood mixed use.
No. The primary use for neighborhood mixed use, it says more than 10 units and over 4 stories on major streets. So again, for major streets, you're thinking more about things like this.
We didn't mean that. It'd be a good time to.
This doesn't look like the image that is in Richmond 300 to describe neighborhood mixed use.
Mm-hmm.
Like the RN3 does not at all like that.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like the building.
Like one building, but not everything else.
Yeah.
Renee, you could go back a couple slides, sort of a similar comment on neighborhood mixed use. One of your slides, you characterized it as multi-family district, but that's really not what the description of neighborhood mixed use is. I mean, its primary use is single family houses, accessory dwelling units, and small multifamily. Yeah. So there's a diversity within that includes single family residential. So I wouldn't characterize neighborhood mixed use under 300, under Richmond 300 as a multifamily district.
I'm talking about sort of the maximum that's allowed as of right. And so that might not be correct. You might say, or only certain parts of you should allow 10 units. Other areas should be limited to less. So happy to hear that from you as well. We're trying to understand what Richmond 300 is saying. You know, are we predominantly multifamily? We're talking about permissions. Even if, you know, the existing conditions are mostly single family, but let's say we allow up to multifamily, but it's not going to change everything tomorrow. Or do we say we got to stick to single family in some of these areas and other parts of it we go to multifamily? We need to hear more about that. So, and then this is just again thinking about with apartment multifamily districts. So going from something like R43, this is a huge increase, but mostly it's because of getting rid of these minimum density requirements, which really radically.
Yeah, that 14 units per acre is what is your maximum density today under R43. So we just showed a site, a 2250 square foot site, and what you might build that out, what it might look like if you tried to meet the 14 units per acre, which is the maximum build out. And if you remove that density, you might get something that looks like on the right hand side. And so, you know, if one of the things that we're trying to do is get more residential units, especially in multifamily areas, we might want to reconsider whether we want to actually regulate density as a metric.
Yeah, and so here we're thinking about areas that are probably already zoned multifamily or around the outside of neighborhood mixed use. This is not a fit of the standard for neighborhood mixed use. More unusual. So let me just, before we go to the discussion, I'm just going to put one more thing here. Colin, you want to just speak really quickly?
Can't require affordable housing. We don't have that authority here in Richmond. Charlottesville does. They do have an inclusionary piece, but just wanted to throw out the idea for discussion. So what Charlottesville does is it has 3 primary residential districts, and they go a lot further than we may be talking about in Richmond. So this RA is kind of their lowest intensity residential district. But just the idea of it, and just wanted to see what you think of it as a group. So in RA, you're allowed up to 3 units by right. If you keep the existing structure, you're allowed 4 units. So there's an incentive built in to keep the existing structure on the lot instead of tearing it down. And then you can provide up to 8 units if the additional units that you're providing above 4 or 3 are affordable to households at or below 80% AMI. And so they just have different categories of zoning that basically do the same thing, depending, and just ratchet up the intensity. So RB has up to 6 units allowed by right, and you go up to 12 units if they're affordable. RC has up to 8 units by right, and you can go up to 16 units. This is a pretty new program, so it's just been put in place. So nothing has really happened in terms of generating affordable units. I do know there is a project that's come in RB that's looking to utilize the up to 6 units.
So something also to think about when you're thinking about, again, the level of intensity around the outside of residential areas or neighborhood mixed use. Maybe this is a factor as well too. Maybe you would consider a little bit more intensity in exchange for.
And then they do.
You can do that now. There is a voluntary program.
Yeah.
That Richmond has.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like everybody's just using the SUP process to get additional height right now. So why don't you go through the hassle of affordability bonus? So yes, we're gonna have to balance that.
Are the, like for the one in Charlottesville that they're building, is there, you may not know, but are they getting some sort of other incentive to do it?
Yeah, so they're just doing the 6 unit one. It's the one project that's proposed. I don't even know if it's in for approval. So it'd be interesting to see how it plays out. James will be around tonight. So I'll be able to ask.
Can you go back a slide? So on the affordables, that's pretty incredible when you think about it. I don't know what people are paying for apartments when they buy a lot in terms of, is it $45,000, $50,000 per unit is what they'll pay for land maybe. So I'm just throwing that as a number. I don't know if that's true or not. But when you look at that and you see up to 6 units allowed, so let's say up to 6 units allowed at $300,000 lot, which sounds cheap at the moment. But being able to double that really puts a fair amount of value into it. Especially when you're thinking Richmond now, 80%, I think, for a single person is median income, I think was like $50,000 or $51,000. So if you drop that down to $40,000, you can get pretty decent rent on 6 units pretty easily. Makes it pretty financially reasonable.
You had a question?
Yes, and correct me if I'm confused, but in the presentation that was sent out in these percent AUI, and that,
Good
so
question.
I just want to know which one.
This one is correct. And so we shared this presentation with James earlier, James Priest, the director in Charlottesville. And he suggested that what we were showing in the presentation was sent out as well.
Oh, okay.
So Charlottesville have to do a charter amendment to do this? Is this something we would have to do?
Not for the incentive piece.
For the affordable housing part?
I don't believe so, not for the incentive piece.
They had to get enabling legislation from the General Assembly, and there's only, it's mandatory inclusionary zoning.
Is for a mandate by a certain level of affordability. Affordability with every.
I'm sorry?
Just Charlottesville.
It was just Charlottesville that was added recently. There's 4 or 5 other jurisdictions. I think Albemarle has it, and then like 3 or 4 up in Northern Virginia. Richmond has asked the past couple of sessions and it hasn't gone forward.
So yeah, we gotta get going on the workshop. So I'm done the presentation now. You guys should have the worksheets now. I'm hoping we can still get 20-25 minutes each on each question, or each section. So we're gonna start with residential and then do mixed use afterwards. I'll tell you when we're gonna switch over. Yeah. It's rushed. All right, if one person from each group could be the note taker, that would be great.
Like, what do I do?
We'd love to get the city off the special use.
Yeah.
Thing. It's like, we were saying, like, you've got an affordability bonus now. If you meet online, it's like, those
Feel somewhat similar.
Then
folks. I think we all were having a lot of discussion based on the chatter I heard around the room. Some of it might have been tough discussion. Some of it, hopefully we all came to some really great ideas, but unfortunately we're at the end of time. So we want to be respectful of getting everyone out of here at 6, especially since there's another event this evening. So a little sidebar with Mary Ann. I think we agreed we'll turn in our sheets and then maybe do a summary report out at the next meeting. If everyone's okay with that? Okay. All right.
If anybody has any other thoughts that weren't captured in the discussion, feel free to send an email to Mary Ann as well with your thoughts on these questions.
What is this food that you have?
Yes, there is food, since I know we have to quickly move over to the next meeting, so please grab something.
Just a reminder, our next meeting is October 9th, here, 4 p.m. And then obviously we have the panel discussion on the food refresh this evening, at 7 p.m. at Dogwood Middle School, 1701 Floyd Avenue. So thank you everyone for your time, creativity.
No, I just.
Really? I think they're working on it. Park on East Street.